It's kind of interesting. Many years ago, I received an urgent call to visit a dying man in the hospital. I actually didn't know the gentleman very well, but well enough to know that he was paying a high price for his hard living. Years of drugs and alcohol had pilfered his system. Though he'd made peace with God through Christ, his liver was at conflict with his body. When his ex-wife phoned, she was standing at his bedside. She explained, was knocking at death's door. Though I hurried, he entered heaven seconds before I arrived. The hospital room atmosphere had that feel. It just happened. The ex-wife was still standing by his bed. His hair was stroked back from her touch. The imprint of a lipstick kiss was just below the knuckles of his left hand. It was so recent that even perspiration beads sparkled on his forehead, but he was gone. She saw me enter the room. She looked up, and with her eyes and words, she explained, "He just left." He silently slipped out. He exited. He departed. He passed. Not away, but on. Yet, on to where? And in what form? Like, to what place? In what manner? And once there, what did he see? What did he do? What does he know? We so desire to know those things. What happens after all of this? Who in your life just left? When the breathing of your husband ceases, the beating heart in your womb stops, when the beep of your grandmother's monitor became a flatline tone, what happens in that final moment? What's going to happen in yours? Barring the return of Jesus Christ, you will have one. You're going to have a last gasp. You're going to have a final pulse. Your lungs will empty and blood will still. Since the moment actually is inevitable, don't you think we should prepare for it? When asked the question, what will we be after we die, the human race has conjured up actually 4 answers to this question. Here's the first one. What will we be after we die? Human race has come up with this idea. Nothing. We will decay or we will disintegrate. Death is a dead end. Our works and reputation might survive, but not us. That is one option. Another one is we become ghosts, phantoms of what we once were, pale as an old man's beard, structured as a morning mist. What will we be after we die? Specters, just wandering around. Or the third, maybe we become hawks or cows or a car mechanic in Kokomo. Reincarnation rewards or punishes us according to our behavior. We come back to earth in another mortal body. Or we just become part of the universe. Eternity absorbs us like a lake absorbs a storm. We return to what we were before we were what we are. We return to the cosmic consciousness of this universe. According to some folks, we bury the soul when we bury the body, like a wrapping with a hot dog, never expecting to see either again. Other people propose that the spirit abandons the body as a butterfly escapes the cocoon. Christianity, Jesus followers on the other hand, posts a new, startling, surprising idea. What you had before death, you'll have after death. Only better, much, much better. You'll go to paradise, you'll go to heaven. It may not be home, but it's heaven. Then upon the return of Christ, You will receive a spiritual body and inhabit a restored universe. That's the promise that God has given to us. We're going to see that here in just a minute in Scripture. I don't know how it all works, but I do know what God promises. The promise hinges new life on the resurrection of Jesus. The Christian hope depends entirely upon the assumption that Jesus Christ died a physical death, vacated an actual grave, and ascended into heaven, where he, at this very moment, reigns as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You see, the Easter miracle, in other words, changes literally everything. It was Sunday morning after the Friday execution, and the sky was dark. The disciples had scattered, and the Roman executioner was wondering about breakfast. Maybe he was wondering about work, or maybe his next day off, or what sporting event he was going to watch. But he was not wondering about the fellow he had nailed to a cross and pierced with a spear. Jesus was dead. He was buried. He was yesterday's news. Right? Wrong. I mean, God decided to shake things up. There was this violent earthquake. For an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone, and he sat on it. I just think that's a funny picture. For whatever reason, the power of God coming down, right, rolls the stone away, and then you see an angel just kind of sitting on top of there. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. The guards were actually terrified. They were so afraid of him that they shook, and they became like dead men. And the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who is crucified. He's actually not here. He's risen, just as he said he would. Come, see, take a look." Had such words never been spoken, had the body of Jesus decayed into dust within the borrowed tomb, you would not be hearing this message this morning, and we would not be discussing this promise. But the words were spoken, and the promise was made more than once. Jesus, what he does is he appears to the women near the tomb and to the followers in the upper room. He appears to the disciples on the road to Emmaus and his friends on the shore of Galilee. He spoke with them. He ate with them. They touched his body. They heard his words. They were convinced that Jesus had risen from the dead. And so they drew this conclusion. His resurrection is the proof and the promise of ours. What God did for him, he will do for you. When he rose from the dead, Jesus was the first fruits. So if you go into the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes a letter to the churches to a church in Corinth. And in chapter 15 of verse 20 and 23, he talks about first fruits. First fruits is the first taste of the harvest. The farmer can anticipate the nature of the crop by sampling the first of the crop. So if you pull an orange off of a tree and you taste it, and it's juicy and sweet, and you know pretty much the rest of the crop is going to taste that way. It's going to be a great year. We can anticipate, and that's kind of the same description Paul gives us of Christ. We can anticipate our own resurrection by trusting the empty tomb of Jesus. So if I might give you just a little bit of, you wonder what are things going to look like when we die? Well, here's what's going to happen to you. And I don't do it as, I'm just going from scripture. I don't know how it's all going to work, but here's what we learn. Upon death, your spirit will immediately enter into the presence of God. You will enjoy fellowship with the Father and with those who've gone before you. We believe this to be true because of verses like what Paul writes in Philippians chapter 1. He says, if I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet, what shall I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I'd love to be here, but I'd love to be home. I desire to depart, and I desire to be with Christ, which, by the way, is far better. You see, here's what Paul believed. Paul believed that his last breath on earth would be followed by his first glimpse of Christ in paradise, which is the same for you. Say goodbye to loved ones. Say hello to God. You will then enjoy fellowship with God and the loved ones until the day when Christ returns. We find in John chapter 5, the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God. This is kind of when it gets a little like, what are we talking about here? But we learn a little bit about, kind of get a little insight of how God's going to work. In John chapter 5, the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God. All who are in their graves will hear his voice, and they will come out. He who created us will then collect us. Jeremiah 31:10, the Lord who scattered his people will gather them together. I've stood in cemeteries. I've kind of attempted to imagine what that moment would look like. It's kind of creepy at times, kind of weird. The road that Stephanie and I drive almost every day takes us by a small country cemetery in Canby. The headstones are faded beyond recognition. No dirt has been turned for a century. The few discernible names share a common last name in this cemetery, and I assume that a family is buried there. It seems to be just one of the millions of burial spots around our planet. Yet, if these words are true, it will someday witness a miracle beyond words that we can't understand and comprehend. The same God who shook the soil of Jerusalem will shake the soil of these simple cemeteries. The grass will be pushed back from within, the caskets will open, and the bodies of these forgotten farmers will be called into the sky. Spirits will be reunited with their bodies, glorified bodies. What does that look like? Sounds weird, right? Well, the resurrected Jesus is our example. Okay, so on this Sunday, his resurrection body bore a semblance to the crucified one. If you read through this account on Sunday, right, he goes around and he sees different people and he spends time with them. We're going to look at this here at the end of John chapter 20. But as he does that, his his body bore a semblance to the crucified one, but only a semblance. Jesus' disciples, who lived with him for 3 years, actually didn't really recognize Jesus. Right? If you go back into John chapter 20, verses 11 through 18, Mary Magdalene, and then in Luke 24, the Emmaus disciples, and then in John 21, the 12 disciples, they saw Jesus on this day, but they didn't see Jesus. He did familiar physical things as walking and eating. He did things that he had done, but he appeared actually in a little different form. So it'd be kind of like this. In my bed, in my office, I have pictures of my kiddos when they were little. My kids don't look like those pictures anymore. But when I look at the pictures and I see them as an infant, I guess I would experience the same phenomena as these individuals did when they saw Jesus. Perhaps upon study, I would spot a common trait, the shape of your mouth or an angle of your eyes. But finding common traits would require focus, because as we've grown and evolved and matured, we have changed. It's interesting. My second granddaughter was born yesterday. Her name is Riley. And we saw pictures of her yesterday. And I look at those pictures of her, and I'm like, I wonder what pieces of that will remain. The squinting of the eyes, the shape of the ears. But she's going to change, right? She's going to grow. She's going to mature. She's going to look different as she gets older. I think it's kind of similar to what we find here. When they looked at Jesus, they're like, wow, you look familiar. But not, well, when you see all of this, it might be something that you'll be like, okay, this is a new body. We're so much better. It doesn't look exactly like it used to, which I think for some of us we'll be happy about. 1 John chapter 3 says, when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. We shall be like him. Man, let the amputees and the infected, the bedridden and the anemic put themselves to sleep with this promise. We shall be like him. Let the wheelchair bound and the people who have their bodies are just breaking in front of them go to sleep with this promise in their heart that we shall be like him. We shall graduate from this version to his likeness. We shall enjoy a body like his, made from heaven and earth. Let us hope for tomorrow that the strength that we find in him will be something that we'll be able to relish. Some of you indwell such road-weary bodies. Your knees ache, your eyes dim, your skin sags. Others of you exited the womb on an uphill ride. And while I have no easy answer for your struggle, I actually implore you to stand with me on the promise of Paul. 2 Corinthians, Paul writes this, so I'm not giving up. How could we? Even though on the outside, it often looks like things are falling apart on us. On the inside, where God is making new life, not a day goes by without his unfolding grace. These hard times are small potatoes compared to the coming good times, the lavish celebration prepared for us. There's far more here than meets the eye. The things we see now are only here today and they'll be gone tomorrow. But the things we can't see now will last forever. You see, the promise that we have during this moment, this Resurrection Sunday, is this is not the way it's going to stay. There's something better after this. And at the end of the day, there are moments where I'll be asking the question, so what does it look like? Where are we going? How does this all play out? I really don't know. But what I do know is this promise, that it's going to be better. It's going to be exceptional. We're going to be in the presence of our God. And it is all because of the life, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of the Son of God. You see, that night, you find on Sunday night, Jesus rose from the dead. He has met with all kinds of people. And then you see in John chapter 20, starting with verse 19, you see a really intriguing end to the day. It'll come up on the screen for you. And it says this, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came, stood among them, and said, peace be with you. And he said this. He showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And with that, he breathed on them and said, receive the Holy Spirit. I told you yesterday that our granddaughter was born. Immediately, she was put on oxygen, and she still is on oxygen this morning. She's okay. She's not in NICU or anything like that, but it makes you nervous. Grandpa hasn't slept much last couple of nights. Praying for his little girl who's in labor. And then our granddaughter is born. And you get the news she's healthy and she's beautiful. But she needs a little bit of help to breathe. This morning, I sort of woke up. I was already awake and our phone was dinging and we were getting the updates. I didn't sleep though, because all night I just asked for God to breathe for my granddaughter. would you just strengthen her lungs? Would you give her breath that she may live? On the very last night, the last thing that is recorded about Jesus on this Resurrection Sunday is this: he breathes life into his disciples and says, I know that it can be a struggle to breathe in this broken, messy world, but let me breathe in you, that you may have life, that you may have the power and the strength of my Father in you, that you may do everything that you've been designed to do and live life on purpose until the day that I come back again. See, this is where the disciples are when we meet them in this passage. They're adrift, they're confused, they've locked themselves behind closed doors, they're afraid, and yes, they've heard some strange stories. They've heard stories from Mary about seeing Jesus. But as you can tell from this passage, that wasn't enough to even remotely grasp the joy of the resurrection. They're terrified. John's gospel says on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, they locked the doors. They'd heard the stories. Jesus is alive. He's alive. And you would think that in the midst of the joy of that moment, they would walk out those doors and go, hot dog, everything he said is good. We are fine. That's not the way it worked. It's so true for me, and maybe for you a lot of days. We know God's in control. We know that he's alive. But man, I'd rather just keep my head under the covers today, because this is where I feel safe. Try and get a sense of the heaviness that the disciples would be feeling. Not just that evening, but ever since they saw Jesus taken away, placed on trial, scourged, nailed, hung, and buried. Likely it was only after their burial that the trauma began to actually set in. That is what it was. It was trauma. The disciples were not just sad and disappointed, they had to have been traumatized. They had just witnessed their friend, their teacher, their rabbi, their Lord brutally executed. Maybe some of them were plagued with images of their friend dying over and over and over again in their minds. They probably didn't sleep much over the last couple of nights at all. They didn't have a lot of breath to breathe. They were probably short on breath. They were probably crying out with a voice. They were just simply shutting down. They were simply losing track of time. In any case, that resurrection night, they sat together, doors locked, in fear. Have you ever been there? Like you can't breathe? It's hard. It's terrifying. It's scary. I remember moments I would play sports when I went to college down in California. Sorry, Carrie, but California doesn't have the cleanest air in the world. I would go down there, and I went to college down there and played basketball. And I remember the first several months that I was down there, I was huffing and puffing, right? I couldn't take a deep breath. The air was so dirty. I was like, and it scared me. It terrified me. As I was playing, I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. It's like you're underwater and you're desperately wanting to come up for air. See, that's the context that the risen Lord appears in. He stands among them and he says, "Peace be with you." Okay, hang on for just a moment. I can hardly breathe. And you're saying, "Peace be with me?" And he shows them his hands and he shows them his feet. I am Jesus, the one you've spent life with. One of the really special things that my daughter texted me last night was this. She said, because she hasn't been able to spend time with her daughter since she was born, since she's getting some oxygen, and it's really breaking my daughter's heart, right? You know those moments. So what my daughter did was she took her robe off, she gave it to the nurse and said, "Would you put this around my girl? Because I want my girl to know that I'm there, even when she's struggling breathing." Jesus comes into the brokenness, the scariness, the yuckiness of a near-death experience for us when we're dying in the middle of a mess. We're traumatized by the things of life that are around us, and Jesus walks in, he says, "Peace be with you. I got you." And he comes and he breathes into them his spirit. He gives them the breath that they need to live. By the way, that's part of his character. It's part of who God is. It is what God does. This is his wheelhouse. In his character, he gave breath to Adam. When Adam was formed from a lump of clay from the earth, Adam would have remained a lump of clay until God breathed his spirit into Adam and became living flesh. Go to Genesis 2, read about it. It's great stuff. But that wasn't a one-off for God. God not only did this for him, he does it to bring people back from death. Remember Ezekiel, if you go back into the Old Testament, you've heard stories about this valley of dry bones. The Lord has taken Ezekiel to a valley of bleached white bones. The bones symbolize the state of the nation, his brothers and sisters. God asks Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel answers, "Sovereign God, only you know." And the Lord commanded Ezekiel to say to those bones, "This is what the sovereign Lord said to these bones. I will put breath in you and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am Lord." You see, family, without God's breath, you are dead. So Ezekiel says, "I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life, and they stood on their feet, and they became a vast army." You see, the breath of God has become an image of resurrection hope. For me, as I get older, I find when I climb steps, I run out of breath pretty quickly. It happens. But Jesus offers hope of the restoring, life-giving breath of Jesus that can fill my lungs. This moment on Sunday evening offers hope that as we find ourselves in the muck and the mire of life, unable to breathe, maybe suffocated by the crud that's taking place around us, maybe we can learn something from the disciples. Because Jesus is coming and he's saying, "Friend, peace be with you. Let me fill you with my spirit. Let me give you life, which you sorely desire." Perhaps when we finally lose our breath, when we've breathed our last, when we think all is over, when it is finished, we will be awakened once again with the breath of Christ filling our lungs, and we too will rise from the dead. You see, that promise can only be true if Jesus is the Son of God. If he is everything that he said he is, the life giver, the one who provides life through his breath. You see, as Jesus followers, we know this to be true. That on the night that he was betrayed, he sat with his disciples, right? And he spent time up with his disciples, and he implemented a time to remember what was going to take place, his death, burial, and his resurrection.